So the most important body of work you were involved in were the cells, I think.
Well, that's when she just got the studio and she started working at and then I went back to Italy with her because she didn't, it was hard. She wanted to go back to Italy, but she didn't want to go alone at that point. She was older, and so we went back to Italy, so she started working in the stone quarries again. But the cells were like this big group of work, and then we did a lot of casting. She went back to the foundry. She had no market, so she was not doing any casting or auditioning. She couldn't sell one piece. She didn't want to have 6 of the same piece. I mean, there was just no market, and she had no storage because she lived in a house. So, I sort of went to the foundry and said, at a certain point we needed more work to sort of tell the story. And so then I would take her to the foundry and she would work. She had her own little area in the foundry and she would be retouching the waxes and working and all that.
Getting back to the cells, how did these cells come to reality?
The studio that she got in Brooklyn was an old sewing factory that then somehow moved to Asia, making blue jeans or something. And there was a lot of crap there. And so Louise started with these walls that were shelves, and she started making these sort of architectural, these hinge panels that made these sort of environmental space. And then she started putting things, because she was clearing out her house, because she finally had a studio, and she was putting things in, and then, at a certain point, let's say up until the 1980s, most of Louise's work was abstract. It maybe had figurative illusions, and there were a few figurative pieces, but it wasn't until she started incorporating objects in her life that were, whether it was her clothes or Shalimar perfume and all that the cells really became a way of housing these things where she was making things and had things from her life that had some sort of symbolic or emotional connection that she needed to make an architecture to contain these things. But prior to that, the work is pretty abstract. I mean, that's what, if you see in a way, even here, then you have this idea of objects from her house, or, that was quite late in the work. And that's the cells, really, because as she was showing, even though she didn't go to the shows, but, I would show her pictures, and, when she was working, even at the studio, when you get into a lot of these spaces, the scale throws things off, because sculpture's about space, and some of these galleries or museums were so big, and her work was this, so I think she wanted to create her own architecture which set the scale for the things she was putting inside. So they do become sort of, regardless of how big the space is, you're entering a world that's pretty much contained, and she set the parameters of this using the cells.
And the visitor has always the feeling that one looks in something very private and sort of does something forbidden. Did she count on that? Did she...
No, I think most of the cells you are supposed to enter. Of course, they're fragile, but some you could peer in through the window, so you have that idea. And she was interested in the idea of the voyeur appearing, but most of the cells you are supposed to enter and walk. Even the Passage d'Anjou in the next room, she wanted people to walk through and encounter these chambers and work.
Which is unfortunately not possible because everything begins to sort of...
To shake.
Yeah, exactly. So that's... You once said that she never really had the public in mind when she worked. So she really worked for herself, or did she? I mean, she was a visual artist. I always thought that. Well, a thing to think about quite a long time. Is it really true? I mean, she made things to look at, or did she?
She made things that gave her knowledge about herself, or that relieved her anxiety. Then, if someone else saw it and they reacted to it, well, that was okay. But the work was not. I mean, she did a performance, like she did. That is, she was quite aware it's a performance. But most of the pieces, it was really a dialogue with herself. And then, when it was shown, that's why she didn't really show so much. She didn't really have the need. It didn't give her anything to show. It didn't add any. It wasn't helping her. To have a show just added more anxiety. It did not relieve any anxiety. So she had no interest in it, really.
Why is it that the whole work is so, I wouldn't say diverse, but it's so, has so many faces? It's so, I mean, she got very old. She had a long development.
I think if you look at the different chapters of her life, and you look at how she was feeling and what she was doing in her life, the early work to this, I mean, you know, she's not the same person. Her emotional life changed, and the form had to change corresponding as she grew older, as the kids were getting out of the house, as she was, you know, that's sort of even the old, you know, when she got older, she wanted to work with soft material. I think all these sort of formal evolutions came or attached to her emotional life. And she was not into, she didn't, you know, that's one thing I really got, is this idea between art history and art. For her, you know, she was married to an artist, and so they're two separate entities. She always objected that. I mean, Louise knew art history, which she thought, you know, and she had respect for it, but it was a different discipline, and she, you know, didn't like the idea that art history was used to justify this. Like she said, oh, you know, Warhol or Duchamp, let's say Duchamp urinal. She said it's really important, but I don't get anything looking at it. She said I've seen it once. It's important for history, but it doesn't move her. She's interested in the things that move her visually. So, and she always, this idea of history, you know, was in a way, people really think they developed a style, but you really see the style becomes dated. You know, it's like looking at old photographs of yourself 20 years ago. You think you look hip, but you know, it becomes dated. And she was not interested in developing a style, or, you know, the work is consistent in the emotional tenor, but the forms have to change. And, you know, why, you know, spend your whole life basically churning out the same product, maybe for money or market, or Louise couldn't do that. Anyway, she literally couldn't, you know, that's why at a certain point the edition, she was resistant to making an edition, because she's like, I don't want to see 6 of these things. She had to retouch the wax, and it's boring. I mean, she didn't get anything out of it. She was interested in how she could move this way, and move this way, and move this way. I mean, in a way it's very, I mean, I think that's why it's taken history a long time to digest what she's done, because it's actually anti-history. It's like, I want to have, you know, this emotional reaction to the work. I mean, she belongs to history, and she always said, oh, I know I'll be part of history. I'm one little rock in the wall, but it's not what, you know, so many artists are interested in quoting history or taking off on history. And not to say Louise had The Blind Leading the Blind, which is a reference to Bruegel, but it's not really where the motivation or the ideas are being generated from. I mean, you have a whole generation, which Louise said, she had sold a salon, so she met lots of students that are coming out of art school, think they have an idea. You know, it's not the cure for brain cancer, it's some little idea that's proceeding from an intellectual thing. And she always thought that's sort of not the way, thinks it's backwards in a way. That's why her work is extremely pathological. I mean, and that's rare, you know, to work in the conceptual of a pop vein, which is very popular, is because it has this idea of an idea, an audience, and its mimicking was already out there. And Louise didn't feel, you know, that's not what she felt. I mean, she loved Warhol. She thought he was like, you know, pathological, you know, and but I mean, she would say, oh, I don't think he was so good for the art world, because it just opened up, like Duchamp, it just opened up for her a lot of bad art to come out. You know, but, you know, and...
Did you have particular? Did you like a particular artist most? Or did she?
Well, she liked Richard Serra. She liked work that was very different. Most people who came, a lot of students would come and do something that looked like her work, and she hated that. You know, anything that was close to what she was doing, she said, "Oh, this is sort of derivative. I don't know."
So she hated Eva Hesse, for example.
No, Eva Hesse didn't come to the salon and all that. That was before. No, she thought Eva Hesse was probably a little bit too close for comfort, you know, in a way, because Eva Hesse was, you know, was coming from a similar place but very different, a minimal thing. But, you know, but no, she liked. I think she respected Eva Hesse, but she just, you know, it was. I'm talking more when I met her in the 80s, in the sense of that, because, you know, Louise doesn't think the artist is that high on the food chain. I think this is a thing. She doesn't think, you know, she always said, oh, a writer is much better than an artist, because an artist is just expressing themselves, whereas a writer can prove something and it's more rational and it's sort of higher on the food chain. She always said, oh, if my kids were an artist, I would feel like a failure as a mother. You know, she didn't want that. And she, you know, she was very candid. When she had the salons, particularly, she'd say, like, you know, people, oh, you're too smart to be an artist. You could do something better. Or you're so pretty, you should be a model. Stop making this bad art and go out and get a, you know, you should be on the runway. I mean, she really didn't see the artist as this sort of, you know, she didn't have this idea that the artist was so high on the food chain in a strange way.
It was extremely large. I mean, you took me once to her bedroom, and she was sort of this tiny bath surrounded by books, literature, French literature, Balzac,
she was very well, but she had
Victor
a
Hugo.
bookshop. I mean, she actually had when she had this little print, even in New York, at a certain point, you see she was very guilty because she wasn't making any money and she was dependent on her husband, and they had 3 kids and all that. So she had this idea that she could that she should go back to a little bit what she had done and have a little bookshop. It was almost like the bookshop was going back to the connection to redoing something that she had done in Paris before and connected to her father. Of course, financially it was a disaster. She didn't sell one print, one book, nothing. But that was one idea. And then in the end, I think she went back to the fabric, which was then sort of resetting up this sort of tapestry workshop that her mother had. I mean, it's always this mother-father kind of in the ideas and the physical reality in a strange way.
Let's go back to the parents, perhaps for a while. I always had the feeling that I mean, you said it. Really, she loved the father. It's a misconception to say that
she never got over her Oedipal complex. She never resolved that. That's what I think the writing's quite clear.
And her mother was this extremely well organized, very.
The mother, yeah, she loved her. I mean, the mother was,
the spider.
Her mother was the one who sort of protected her in a strange way from the father. I mean, the mother knew what the father was up to and all that. The mother was quite strong. Louise said, my mother was much stronger than I as a person in a way. But, her mother was sick, so it was sort of, death was always looming. And Louise, it was a reversal of the role. She became the nurse of her mother when she was like 14, 15. So that was also could twist your head around in a strange way because, like, the mother was dependent on her. And Louise was pulled out of school to take care of her. She was then sent down out of Paris to go to the south of France because her mother needed to be in warm climate. So, there are all these sort of complexities in relationships, and that's what the work is really about, is really the relationship. From how one person makes you feel this way and how another person makes you feel this way, and this person brings up this conflict, I think. She said it's the encounter with other people that brings up this sort of emotional reservoir of things that are inside you. Not through the ideas, it's really through the encounter of somebody else.
Yeah. And then she always blamed herself to be a very bad mother. Was she a bad mother?
Well, I think it was difficult for the kids. I mean, I wouldn't want to have grown up in that household. I think she always said that, she had to do her work. And see, she wanted to have kids. Her husband did not. But, because her sister had no kids and her brother had no kids, and I think she wanted to have kids. I think and her father wanted her to have kids, and that's why I think and the kids have her name, the Bourgeois name, they don't have her husband's name. She wanted to keep the Bourgeois name going, but when the kids were born, she said, I couldn't handle them. Her husband had to do more of the work. And she realized at a certain point that her need to be an artist was actually really more important in a strange way. But she felt guilty not being a good mother. I mean, the kids were brought up, they both went to Harvard. I mean, they're smart and all this, but I think it was very difficult. At a certain point, they had to fend for themselves. And they did it in different ways.